again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Alumni Chats, a weekly podcast featuring alumni from the Department of Broadcasting and Journalism here at Western Illinois University. My name is Buzz Hoon. I'm the host of the podcast. I'm also the interim dean for the College of Fine Arts and Communication. Today, I'm talking with 1990 alumnus Tim Crowley. And Tim, I think that major of yours in 1990 was mass communications. Is that right?
It was with an emphasis in broadcasting. I think you could choose an emphasis in either that or communication studies or something else. I can't remember, but yes, with an emphasis in broadcasting.
Nice. Yeah. Well, welcome to the show, Tim, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Buzz. It's good to see you again.
Yeah. Let's get a life update. Tell everybody where you are before we start to research all of your history.
Well, I live in the great state of North Carolina, work out of Raleigh, North Carolina, out of the capital, and I've been working in kind of the government PR world for the last 15 or so years after a transition away from 15 years of broadcasting in radio and TV. Currently work for our North Carolina Secretary of State as the Director of Communications and Government Relations. She's one of the longest serving kind of public officials in North Carolina right now. It's kind of fun to work for a living legend in North Carolina politics, and her claim to fame back when she was the first woman elected statewide to an executive branch office, and her claim to fame was she beat NASCAR legend Richard Petty in the general election. So she's been great to work for. Love it. North Carolina politics is certainly interesting and engaging in this day and time of a contentious political world, but we've been able to navigate that successfully.
And we'll talk a little bit about the differences between Illinois weather and Illinois politics and North Carolina the weather and politics. But let's go all the way back, because I want people to know this is a really a cool story, because you're a local kid and you grew up in the Macomb area. And I want to, because my kids both were Macomb homies, I try to tell people, they were very proud of the fact that they had this heritage. What was it like growing up for you? What kind of a impact do you think it had on you?
I mean, I love Macomb. I mean, the fact that you have a major university there makes really the public schools top notch. I mean, because there's kind of some accountability when all the professors' kids are running through the public school system, that we really did get just such a great education. And growing up in a small town, not everybody knew everybody, but it was close knit enough that you could see somebody you knew on every given day, which is kind of different than it is, even in North Carolina, which isn't the biggest city. You just don't get kind of that. In certain places you do here. My father was part of what was known at Western as the Houston Mafia. He was an accounting professor, one of the first ones hired in the accounting department in the Department of Business at Western. And the dean there came from the University of Houston, where my dad used to work. At the time, we were in Louisiana, but he had used to work with the University of Houston. And apparently this dean raided a whole bunch of former and current professors from the University of Houston to come work at the Department of Business at Western. And so they're kind of known as the Houston Mafia, which is kind of entertaining. We loved it. It was funny. My mom just recently passed away, so we were sharing a lot of stories, and one of them I never heard of was when my mom and dad were driving the 2-lane road at the time on Highway 67 from St. Louis to Macomb. My mom turned to him and she said, "We're never going back, are we?" And that was true some 50 years later. It was a great place to grow up. Lots of opportunities. You got to play youth sports. Everybody was just so close knit in high school with a class of only, 230 or so. Everybody knew each other. And I take those values wherever I go.
Yeah, for people that didn't grow up in a small town or a smaller town, and the community that of having a local pool that you go to in the summers and riding your bikes through the neighborhoods and just kind of the square, which if you've been in Macomb and you've seen the square, what it's like just to be part of that community. It's something that impacts an individual at a cellular level, I think, as they continue on.
Look, we used to leave in the summer when school was out. We used to leave the house at 8 or 8:30 in the morning on our bikes, and probably not get home until 7 or 7:30 for dinner. Parents didn't necessarily know where we were, but we're never worried. There was no Life 360 to keep track of where your kids were. But you could do that in the community. Everybody felt safe. We used to ride to the Western golf course from our house every day up that big hill by the president's house. That was a chug. But, we used to, that was kind of the babysitter for my brother and I. We would either ride our bikes or our parents would drop us off at 8 o'clock in the morning and come pick us up at the golf course at 5 o'clock during the summer. So we had a good time.
What kind of things did you do in high school, and what was it like? Were you trying to find out where your skills are? Did you have an idea that you were interested in broadcasting?
Maybe not broadcasting right off the bat, but certainly kind of news in general. I worked for the school newspaper when we had one there. I think it was called the Spider Web, or so. I can't exactly remember what the name of the high school paper was, but I was a sports writer for the school newspaper. I played several sports in high school. I played 1 year of freshman football, and I was a third string defensive end. And when I figured out that I could be one of the top golfers in the high school, I switched. And I think my junior and senior year was the number one golfer in the school. And I played a little bit of basketball for a few years, but my love was baseball. I played baseball through high school, and now I'm kind of a baseball dad. Both of my boys have played baseball, and one of them still does in high school.
Well, I think that's part of the great part of Macomb as well. There's so much diversity, and that they allow for kids to have so many programs maybe you don't have at other programs at other size schools, because again, they have a football program, but they also have golf, they have cross country, they have soccer. And it's not really a huge school, so the numbers can be thin, but so you get the opportunity to find out if you're any good.
Yeah, I mean, it was, so compared to like where my sons go to school here in Durham, North Carolina, and their class size is over 600, the school size is 1,800. They make cuts in sports at the JV level, so you may get cut before you ever even get a chance to be on a field. And that was kind of different in Macomb. Most JVs were, if you could play or be on the team, and eventually, like when you were at the varsity level, they would end up cutting, but you could, figure out if you could play. The coaches could figure out if you were play. The teams are big. I think our baseball team freshman and sophomore year was like 40 some kids. But we found other schools who could field two teams, and we would play like an A and a B kind of JV thing. So all the kids would, get a chance to play. But there was certainly not a lack of opportunity. I got to be in a musical production at the high school. I got to do a whole bunch of other things while I was there. So it was not short of opportunity. I would say that, in terms of the broadcasting side, I thought actually in high school that I would lean towards being more of a DJ. I was very interested in music. Actually, Chris Smith, who I think still probably works at Western and is
I think he went to ISU, but I know Chris. Yeah, he's a friend of ours.
He and I started our own DJ business in high school. And that's how we made our money. We DJ'd all the high school dances. We DJ'd weddings, and we were really busy. And that was kind of my first interest, was music and DJing. I thought I might be a radio DJ, and certainly transitioned into that a little bit when I was at Western, but ended up figuring out that the real kind of entryway for me was on the news side.
So let's talk about your experiences at WIU. Now, you put together, for me, some of the names of people that you went to school with, and it's sort of a who's who of people. Let's just talk about some of the people that you remember hanging out with I'm sure it was partly in Salee Hall, also maybe Memorial.
Salee Hall, Memorial, and then for me also Hardee's. There was one of my friends from school was Beth Jones, and I think she was in all of that. So she and I worked at the student union Hardee's, which I think might be a Chick-fil-A maybe.
It is, yeah.
We both worked. I used to work kind of the lunch shift. I would go and work from like 10 o'clock until 1, and then take an early morning class, and then work at the radio station or take classes in the afternoon. But it's kind of a good little gig that you could kind of make a little cash on the side in between. She and I were good friends, and then certainly, Mark Newtbar was a good friend and worked with radio station. My broadcast partners on the TV side for the TV station there in Salee Hall, I remember Katie Lubavitch was on the anchor desk. I was the sports anchor. I think our weather guy, who we got all of them from like the meteorology department of Western, it's kind of a great partnership there. Well, I think his name was Aaron Anderson, I think was our weather guy, but certainly got to know like Jeremy Spencer very well, working both in TV and radio. Jonathan All, who really wasn't a communications major, I don't think, but
he was music, I think.
He was a music major, but worked at WIUM at the same time that I did as a student, and became a news director there eventually. We certainly knew each other, and there were a few others who went through the news side. Eric Jomey, who I don't think was a communications major either, but this they brought in a whole bunch of different interests, which was great also at WIUM. But I'm trying to think of other names. I mean, there was some great talent at WIUS at the radio station when I was there. A guy named Len Kelly just had killer professional vocal chops. A guy named Mark Manuel the same way. I think he ended up working at one of the community radio stations as well.
I think he got up in the Quad Cities.
Yeah. I mean, there was just some major talent flowing through both Western and kind of the ancillary programs like WIUS and WIUM at the time.
So when you were working at WIUM, were you learning some of the news angles? And I think we talked a little bit before about that. It was Bill Wheelhouse who was the news director at the time.
So Bill Wheelhouse was the news director. I worked both some news, and I just was also a board operator on the weekends, running kind of the music shifts. And because I was the local, I got the 12-hour shifts during the holidays. I would go in like at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday and work until it closed because most of the other students were gone. Bill was certainly a mentor of mine, a great news guy, really strong on kind of the ethics side of broadcasting, instilled that in a lot of young reporters, and still does. And I was, privileged to work for him, and then work for him again later on in life in Springfield. And we, stayed connected pretty firmly there for a number of years. I actually first started working when I was a freshman at WIUS, which is more the college music station. Kind of the first I heard of them was, I think, when I was a senior in high school. I flipped it over to that station one time and heard a Fine Young Cannibals song. And that sold me on kind of, that's where I wanted to be when I went to Western. So, I mean, it was on probably a month or two of when I walked onto campus that I walked into WIUS and put in my audition tape, and they gave me a 2-hour shift, and eventually became the music director one year, the station manager the following year, and got kind of heavily involved in the leadership side of WIUS. And that made me a prime kind of candidate to transition upstairs to more the professional side of WIUM. And Kenny Thurman, who was our advisor at WIUS, also worked at WIUM, and he was the one that helped me kind of make that transition up to the more professional side.
Yeah, KT was great. Yeah, and also I think you even mentioned that you got an opportunity to sub for him as a DJ at the Change of Pace one time.
I still love music. It's still really a love of mine, and that was just a blast. KT used to DJ a lot at the Change of Pace on the weekends. I think it was after I had left Western, but was still working at K100 in the community, and I got a sub for him a couple of times to spin a few tunes at the Change of Pace, and it was a blast. I had a good time.
He's a fixture. He's a fixture. I'm trying to think, because you're predating me there but who were, besides Sharon Evans?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you had Sharon. Who were some of the faculty?
I had Sharon. Sam Edsel had just joined, maybe not in my freshman year, but maybe sophomore year. You might have. Roger Sadler had started pretty early, not my freshman year, but maybe after that. There was a guy that came down and taught like broadcast theory from the Quad Cities. I can't remember what his name was. Michelson, maybe. I can't remember what his name was. And kind of the other fixture that, maybe a lot of people don't mention is Everett Nelson. He wasn't a professor, but he was the department, basically. Yeah. I mean, he knew how to fix everything, and he provided just great counsel to students, always had a smile on his face. And, it got stressful at times in that production room when you were under a deadline, and he was always walking around there with a smile on his face and putting you at ease, even though you might be under some intense pressure.
A great human being.
There's no doubt about that.
He was a great person. So when you graduated,
Mike, is it McMurray?
Mike Murray.
Michael Murray. He was kind of the radio guy when I was there. He was
and Mike has retired. Many of these people have retired, but you know what Mike's doing? He's working at Tri-States doing the morning edition.
Oh, really? That's great. He always had a great pair of chops too. He just never used them.
He did, I know. So he is perfect for that position right now. So let's talk about your first professional gig when you graduate.
Yeah, so I worked at one of the community stations, K100, WKAI. You worked there as well before me, I think.
Yeah.
I actually started off working an overnight DJ shift. So I would work like this 12 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, but that only lasted a few weeks, and then the second news person had left within a couple of weeks of me being there. And so I tell the news director at the time, his name was Ron Williams, said, "Hey, I'll go do it. I'll cover the city council meetings and blah, blah, blah." And he sent me out one afternoon. I came back, had a couple of stories the next morning, and the rest was history. I changed from the overnight DJ into the afternoon news anchor, and then he left after like maybe a year and became the news director there, kind of in maybe 91, 92, and worked there until 1994 when I did, you and I know that commercial radio doesn't pay all that much.
That's right.
And so, but it was a great testing ground. It was a great learning. Got to learn local politics, got to cover, a major mayoral race. I mean, there was a mayor that had been in Macomb for some 25, 30 years who was running against Tom Carper, who ended up being a mayor for 20 or 25 years. But that was like, it was a very congenial, I got to host, I think probably the only mayoral debate on live radio.
Wow.
And, it was a great learning experience about small town politics and how to cover those things and what those issues mean to local people in the community. And worked there until 94 when I left to go get my master's degree.
So you went to UIS in that program. And after getting that, you got it. Of all the places, you come right back.
It came full circle. So I went to, I had the distinct year where I started out at Sangamon State University and then ended up at University of Illinois Springfield and never left the same school. They transitioned into the University of Illinois branch. but they had a specialized program there in public affairs reporting. You kind of had to know the broadcasting going in, and they selected like 6 broadcast and 12 print, and you really got just a crash course in political science. And they had an internship the second half, and I interned with Illinois Public Radio, and their bureau chief left like about the first couple weeks that I started my internship. And so I was kind of flying solo for a few weeks, and then they hired Bill Wheelhouse from WIUM to be the bureau chief. So he and I were back together again, and I was working with him. And then after a few months, ended up taking over that full-time gig at WIUM and moved back to Macomb, and was there for a few years and loved every minute of it.
And among the things that which I greatly appreciate, not only that Wheelhouse did, but then you did, and Rich Egger, who followed after you, have always done, is you continue to have a mentoring relationship with our students. And you helped set many young people off on a career of success, including, I think you worked with Cisco Cotto.
Mm-hmm. Cisco was one of my students. Kevin Kestner, who I can't remember if he was in communications or meteorology. He might have been in both at the time at Western. So he was one of mine. I had Aaron Stremmel, who I think was in the communications department.
Yeah.
Aaron Dusterhouse, I think, was in the communications department. So we usually I had 4 students at a time, I think, on staff. And, it made it seem like we had this huge news department when, like I was at K100, you're offending, with 2 people, and, you had 6 reporters going out and covering Macomb news, which was, great. I think what my philosophy was with the students is, you take them and you go out and show them how to do it like once or twice, and then you just kind of let them go, make their own mistakes. I mean, certainly counsel them about how to write news. My intention was for them to go out, and when they were in a city council meeting or in a county commission meeting, to be able to think critically about what they were hearing, and to then funnel that into some kind of a news piece that would make an impact on people, not tell them how to write it, not tell them which soundbite was the best, although we would certainly go through all of that. But for them in the meeting to be aware of what things might be newsworthy within the meeting. That one time I sent a student out and they came back and they had maybe had put one story together, and I was like, there's more to a city council meeting than that. And so they joined me later and they saw that, out of these 6 or 7 agenda items at a city council meeting, I was able to make like 5 stories that were impactful and needed to be talked about. And they just kind of need that little bit of direction and be shown how to kind of do that and to help think critically. And then the rest of it kind of comes. I mean, I wasn't too worried about the writing. We would go through all that. But I think serves the students well, not only if they were in broadcasting, but just in life. I mean, they're going to go to a school board meeting as a parent, or they're going to go to a board meeting working for some Fortune 500 company, and they got to be able to think critically when they're in those situations. And so that's kind of the way I approached my mentorship.
Well, and that is a great thing to pass along to a young person. But I think you also, we're generally, I mean, from even hearing from Cisco and things like that, is just general how to act as a professional and how to deal with adults, because, we're in this sort of transitional period where we're, a young person learning to, how do you represent yourself and how do you ask an adult questions in a respectful way, but also trying to get to the information that you need to.
I think that's right. And I think, I didn't probably have as much issue with that, or my students probably didn't have as much issue with that, simply because of the legacy that Bill Wheelhouse had already left on the city council and the county commission. And, I just remember when I was a student with him, there was not me, but a couple of other student reporters had a few run-ins where they had some issues around, being where we could, place mics in the city council meeting and stuff. And it's hard if you're a student about confronting kind of what you think is right when in a room full of adults. And, they were able to work through those issues and work directly, afterwards in a professional way with the leaders of the city council and other places about, okay, here's the law about what we get to do. And so you can't like block us from, where we get to put a microphone in this committee meeting kinds of stuff. And so it's just, it's a really good training ground for students on how to handle kind of really what could have been a touchy situation.
So how did you end up with your next position was it the next one in North Carolina? Because that seems like a big, like all of a sudden you were going to move you across the country.
Well, I knew I had been at WIUM at that point for a few years, and I always knew because of my internship at Illinois Public Radio that I was really more interested in politics at a statewide level, potentially national. I didn't know. I never worked at the national level either, but certainly was more interested in politics at a statewide level. I figure I had kind of done enough of the local side. There was a state house public radio bureau chief position open in Raleigh, North Carolina, to report on state house politics for the kind of network of public radio stations here. Certainly my background in the leadership at WIUM, but also, working for Illinois Public Radio and reporting on state politics was very helpful there. I wasn't the first one in North Carolina to do that position. I was the first one kind of in the way that they were approaching the position. They had always kind of had one reporter from one of the public radio stations go down there and do it, but this was much more of a different thing. Approach where I was almost doing it like Illinois Public Radio, where I was kind of broadcasting stories out statewide and trying to do them from a more of a statewide perspective.
But Tim, you don't know anybody.
I did.
How is it?
I have a twin brother who was getting his PhD at North Carolina State at the time in microbiology. So I had visited a couple of times, and so I knew I liked the area and the climate. Oddly enough, when I went down to North Carolina to interview for that position, he was still living there. And by the time I got the job, he had already gotten a job in San Diego and was gone.
So you knew
by the time I
somebody
moved there, he was gone. It would have been nice if we were both there at the same time. That would have been great.
Yeah.
But it just didn't work out that way. But North Carolina's been great. I mean, once I got here, I knew I was going to stay.
Well, before we leave the area of news, I want to talk about some of the things that you covered, which I thought was interesting. I want to hear some of the stories about, for instance, covering the Ku Klux Klan wizard.
So that was, I would say, I've had some interesting interviews and some great opportunities to interview really unique people in my life, from presidents to astronaut Jim Lovell was on campus one time. But I'm telling you, the most intimidating and challenging interview I ever conducted, and it was by phone. It wasn't even in person. The guy was in Chicago at the time, but it was just so intimidating against kind of everything I stand for to interview.
Right.
This grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, who their group was coming down to do some kind of an event, cross burning, believe it or not, in like London Mills, which is like 20 minutes, I think, outside of Macomb, Illinois. We just happened to see one of the flyers somewhere, and it had this guy's phone number on it. And so we called them and talked to him. We actually, my second in command there, Don Johnson, who was around WIUM for a long time, actually went out to the event and tried to interview people who were going to this thing. It was just, a very, very difficult interview, but that had to be told. And I think it was important for the community to hear kind of how, I'll just say, offensive the stances were, so that, they clearly understood what was happening at this event. Not sure it impacted the event or stopped people from going to it, or, but interviewed Bill Clinton, interviewed other presidents, and that wasn't as intimidating as that interview.
So when you're in North Carolina, as in radio, what kind of things were you covering that were new to you that you hadn't done really before in Illinois?
One, just kind of the style of politics is different in North Carolina, a little more conservative. We certainly had some interest, although for the South, North Carolina at the time was a much more progressive state in the South, even so than it is now. It's become much more of a red state like some of the other Southern states than it was at the time. It was kind of held out as this beacon of progressiveness. Certainly covered hurricanes, which we did not get in Macomb, Illinois. Covered my share of tornadoes in Macomb, but not hurricanes. And it's completely different, right? Tornadoes are come and go like real quick. You might have 15 minutes warning. Hurricanes, you're sitting there waiting for 3 or 4 days for something to happen, and then it happens for 24 hours, and then it takes 5 months to recover.
Oh my God!
It's just this massive event when it happens, but the TV coverage is 24/7 for 5 days leading up to it. You're just kind of watching this big storm approaching and battening down the hatches. And I usually covered the stories from what's known as the Emergency Operations Center, so we got to go down there and be part of the briefings every few hours. National Guard was always there, kind of the state leaders and the governor were always there giving briefings about the storm, and that's where we were usually holed up. So I was never really felt pretty safe that I was in an emergency operations center. I was really never in any danger, but it was certainly interesting to cover. And really that was kind of one of my forays into at least making kind of national stories out of stuff that was happening in North Carolina, and being on NPR and kind of getting the opportunity for friends who were in Washington State or others to hear Tim Crowley on, hey, I heard you on the radio. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I've been on the BBC, so international also. So it's pretty fun when that happens.
So you're having that kind of success, and I know you were over your 15 years, you won awards, you were honored for what your work was doing. But at some time, how do you come to the decision that, this part of your career is you want to do something different?
So sadly, Buzz, it was kind of an economic decision. I loved public radio. I loved my time when I was working in public TV. did the same thing for the UNC TV, which is North Carolina's public television station, and I was their lead kind of political reporter, and eventually kind of was the lead producer for their evening newscast. But we had our first child. We knew we wanted to have more, and so it really became a lot of an economic decision. I knew that I could advance pretty far kind of on the PR side because I understood the politics now that I got to do it, covering it. So my first foray into government PR side was with Lieutenant Governor Bev Perdue, and she was the first woman lieutenant governor in North Carolina. Everybody was kind of focused on covering the governor at the time when he first took office. I was the only person who stuck a microphone on the lieutenant governor on her first day in office and traveled around every event that she did and did kind of a big profile piece on the first woman in North Carolina history to be the second in command. We knew she had, higher ambitions, and she eventually became the first woman governor in North Carolina history, and got the opportunity to work with her in the governor's office. as well. So certainly a trailblazer, and had a blast doing that, and have continued. I had a few little trips in between, as in politics. Sometimes people on your side don't win. So in between, I've done some other things. I worked for the teachers union here in North Carolina doing communications, and did a little consulting work on my own, but I'm back in kind of the land of the political world and working for the Secretary of State right now. I think back on it, and it's hard to believe this, but I kind of had this claim that I've been the communications director for the two most powerful women in North Carolina history.
That isn't, and that really does. Yeah, I think that's an important achievement. I think that's pretty neat that you had that. But let's talk about the difference in covering news, and then also being in charge of that message. What were the similarities, or what are the differences between what you were doing for public radio news and what you were doing for a communication specialist or director?
Yeah, I mean, the advantage that I think I had is that, you can anticipate what questions are coming. You knew kind of what reporters were looking for. And so I think it made things like writing press releases and kind of quotes that might be usable. I think I kind of had a better grasp of that than somebody who had not worked in the broadcasting world. I also think it helps you prepare. I call them the principles. I think it helps you prepare the principals for an interview. And you can certainly do kind of mock interviewing with them and anticipate maybe some of the tougher questions that could come down the pike. The big differences are, like you said, the messaging. You have to stay constant and constant and constant. And even though you think that somebody has heard it like a million times, they haven't heard it. So you have to really stay disciplined, which is a little different from the news side, right? You're kind of changing up every day what you're writing about. And in the PR world, you're really trying to stay in this consistent message frame, because you have to realize that most of these people haven't heard it. And even if you think they've heard it, they really haven't heard it. But I think that's kind of what prepared me for those positions.
And I like that you noted that your work schedule probably didn't see a whole lot of difference in what you were doing at one time as opposed to what you're doing. And this probably says something about your work ethic, but also, how you do your job.
I think the only schedule change is when I used to do morning radio and used to have to wake up at 3:30 in the morning. That was, even though you think you can get used to it, that's still a little rough. It was great being off at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The golf course, nobody was there.
Yeah.
I'd be able to walk on and get 18 holes in after work. But I think that the land of social media kind of obliterated the lines of what a PR person's hours are. I think, back in the day, maybe in the 80s or whatever, you used to be able to kind of check out at 5 or 6, and a reporter's not going to find you or call you or whatever after that time period. But with social media, smartphones, et cetera, I mean, everybody's on a deadline all the time, and it doesn't matter if you're off work at 6 o'clock. A reporter knows how to reach you on your phone at 11 o'clock in the evening and pretty much expects an answer. So those hours kind of have grayed a little bit, especially when we were much more in kind of what I would call the fishbowl, like when we were in the governor's office. And that was under, a little bit more intense scrutiny than, maybe the Secretary of State's office. There was, a lot of blurred lines about what was acceptable hours to be reaching out to somebody. And one of my jobs in the governor's office was, I had kind of two main jobs. One was to do damage control at the state agencies if they were having issues, or there was a bad story that we knew was getting ready to come out. My job was to kind of work with their communications people to kind of work through what was going to be said or message, and then also, help from the policy side, help figure out how to make that better so that it didn't happen again. And to that end, I was also one of the mantras of our governor at the time, Bev Perdue, that I worked for. She was kind of no surprises. And so my mission was that she was not surprised by something in the newspaper the next morning.
Mhm.
I was on the phone many times in the evening at 11:30 at night telling her what was getting ready to come down the line. So she wasn't surprised. A difficult job, but I think I did it pretty well.
So, Tim, one of the things that I see is sort of you've got this first half career, you got this second half career. I still see you as a young person. Is this because I still see myself as a young person? I'm sure you're enjoying being with the kids and family life and occasionally golfing every once in a while.
Not as much as I used to.
Oh,
occasionally, yes.
Okay. So any third part to the career that you see in the future, are you happy and like what you're doing?
Yeah, I like what I'm doing. It's kind of one of those things you got to make sure you're with when you're in kind of the political world and you're doing PR for more than an agency, but for a candidate, right? For like a Secretary of State or a governor, as opposed to like, I used to work for the Department of Commerce too, and that's kind of a different thing. You have to make sure that you're working for somebody who, one, you like, whose values are aligned with yours. And so, currently I couldn't work for a better person. I've worked for two great, I call them principals, Bev Perdue and Elaine Marshall. I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, those would be the two people I would want to work for and with. God willing, I think the secretary is going to, hopefully run for another term in 2024. I'd love to stick around if she does run and win. This state's becoming a lot more competitive. So she's on the Democrat side of the aisle. She's one of only 3 Democrats on what we call our Council of State, which are our 10 statewide elected officials. But she has, a lot of cross appeal between parties, kind of a living legend. And so I love what I'm doing now. Who knows in the future? Yeah. I've always thought about what would it be like to get in, go work at a university and get back into the mentoring kids kind of or students, not kids, but mentoring students.
You'd be good at it.
Thought about, what would it be like to ever run for office myself? I'm not sure that I would ever want to do that. The fundraising is such just crazy, but maybe at the local, maybe a more local level. But certainly wouldn't mind retired life either, Buzz, and playing more golf.
You can still do so many things out there, Tim. You're not ready for the pasture yet. I'm telling you, brother, you still got some years to go. And I was just going to say, you could become a hired gun and, like they have in the movies where, you just move from one person to another person to you're putting out fires and solving problems.
Yeah, I know. You never know. I mean, there's a place for those kinds of people in the world. And if you have the experience and background to be able to do it, I mean, they're certainly well worth the money. I do look good in purple and gold though, Buzz.
There you go. You get, what would we call that? The North Carolina Mafia? If we started a second version of this, we could start bringing people from North Carolina, from Raleigh.
I'll tell you we talked about this before we got on. I tell you what's great is, there's more leathernecks in North Carolina that you think. I have a leatherneck that lives 2 doors down from me. It's crazy. He graduated in the 70s, but there's more leathernecks in North Carolina than you think there are.
Well, we are glad to have you out there as a representative and an alum, and we are proud to say that Tim Crowley was part of our program. So our last question, Tim, is always, what kind of recommendations do you have for a young person, a student today?
Especially in the broadcasting world, Buzz, I think it's really, you got to figure out a way to get your hands on things. I think, you need the classroom work and to kind of understand all that, but you're going to get more out of If you want to do broadcasting for a living, you're going to get more out of trying to figure out a way to either get your hands on a radio board, on a piece of equipment, go work on a story, even if it's, if you have to go work for the Western paper, to at least go out and work on the news side of things and learn how to write stories and then somehow bring them back into the broadcasting world. It's really, you got to find a way to get your hands on stuff. It's the only way to learn. It's the only way to make mistakes and figure out the best path forward out of those. You got to be aggressive in doing it. There's a lot of students there and only, probably a limited number of opportunities, but you got to find your window to really get involved and to get your hands on something, no matter what it is. That's my best piece of advice. That's the way I approach things. And, I've never had an issue getting a position because of that.
Well, and I would also add to what you had to say, find a good mentor like you were for our students. Find good mentorships. It's
very helpful. I mean, not only professionally, but on the personal side too. It's somebody who you could run things by. And I mean, that's just so invaluable to have somebody who you could rely on for great counsel.
Well, thanks again for being on the show today, Tim. And hopefully I will see you in the Macomb area again.
I will. My dad still is there, so we make trips back occasionally, okay. And I look forward to being back in Macomb actually pretty soon. Hopefully in the next few months. I am getting. I think I'm going to a Western. Western is playing out here in baseball in a few weeks in Charlotte, so I'm hoping to go out and visit our Leatherneck baseball team while they're in Charlotte here in a few weeks.
Very good.
So it's good to see you, Buzz. You and I had some days umpiring that we didn't talk about.
Yeah. Nothing like getting yelled at.
But Western, I love Western. It's just such a great place in the community. I was very excited to see kind of enrollment numbers back up this year. I know there's been a few hard times, but Western is just such a great place that, I'd want other people to be able to have that opportunity there too.
Well, you're an important part of our legacy. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Buzz.
And thanks to all those weekly viewers out there. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast or want to recommend someone, just send me an email. We want to hear from you. We hope that you continue to watch and listen and generally support the university. So until next week, stay safe, take care, and God bless.